So I want to start today. My name is Maria Barnes, and I'm with Barnes Business Solutions. I'm the president of the Access Lunchtime User Group, and going to be going through today's topic. So if you do have questions at all while things are going on, just go ahead and post those in the Skype notes. So for reporting tips and techniques, just some general tips to start out with. When we're talking about access reports, a lot of people think that we are talking about just reports. But if you're talking about, from a broader sense, reporting, there are some clients that you will talk to that consider the results of a query that's displayed like in a form to really be the same thing as a report. What they consider to be a report is simply a set of data or a subset of data that they need information from. So I think the first thing to remember when we're talking about reporting is, do you really need or want an access report? Or is showing them query results in a form of some kind a better fit for what your client needs? And you know, that just depends upon what they want to do with it. In today's day and age, we do a lot less printing of things to paper or saving them to files, and tend to do much more just real-time results searches. So if all they want is to see real-time results, you may very well not need an actual report, but you may be better off instead designing a query that you display on a form. Also, while we're just starting the topic of reporting tips, if you do not already know it, one of the disadvantages of Access web apps, and this presentation, because it's about reports, is more almost exclusively geared towards desktop apps as opposed to web apps. But there is no such thing as Access reports per se in Access web apps. They do have queries that you can do and show on the screen. It is very difficult to print anything from an Access web app, and that is because it is hosted inside of a browser. And so when you are printing, you are actually printing, you know, from the browser print control. There is a couple suggestions that I have here for printing query results, which you can do queries in Access web apps, and getting them to show nicely on paper. And these are to change the print settings when you go to do the print in your browser, to check the shrink to fit, and to make sure that the print is in landscape mode. And then you can also use what's called a custom view page. And that will help you get not all the extras. And let me just demo that here. Let's see if I can get my options in here. So when you are in an Access web app, and this is one that I'm showing here, and this particular, what looks like a report here in the middle, is a particular view into this orders table. And you know, while you could certainly print this extra navigation controls at the top and the bottom are something that you know, even this part, that really aren't part of the report per se. And so if you just went to the control here and you did a print, and you know, that you're going to get this whole screen essentially with all of the navigation controls. But you can, if you have a particular view, and you can see what the actual view is here. Click right. The view is delivered, this last part here. You can view that page directly. If you notice here how the view is default ASPX number, and then this other bit about tile and view has to do with which of these sections you're on and which of the sections within here you're on. If you, instead of doing the default ASPX, if you use the viewer ASPX, you can view the page directly in Access Web Apps, and so you see that you get then a more report-like interface to your view. This is an Access Web App view without all the navigation around it. So, you know, if you were going to print this nicely with a client, you might, for example, show this and then have like a print button up here, and the print button would do something like show this view, so that they could then go and, you know, do a print like this and print it nicely. So that is one you know, Access Web App related reporting tip, and the rest of the presentation today will all be geared around Access Desktop reporting tips, because the rest of the presentation is all geared towards actual reports in Access, which are not available in Access Web Apps. So other general reporting techniques. Each report in Access has a caption field of the property, and it's a good idea to display a friendly name on that. That will print at the top of your report, and you know, you might have that name something odd like RPT something or other, but if you want it to actually be printed on a page, you want it to show something more friendly than that. And so that would be something that you would do by setting the report caption field. You might also want to consider setting the no data event to display something like a message instead of an empty report. That's just a cleaner way of telling your user that whatever data that they queried and that you're trying to show in the report actually returned no results. And you might just display a message that says so, other than, you know, having them wonder, you know, what's going on? What did I do? Did I do something wrong? Is the report really working? You know, if you're just showing a blank report with some headers, they're a lot less sure of that. So this no data event that Access reporting offers allows you to interrupt a report that has no data associated with it or found, and do something like display a message and cancel the report or something like that. If you're using a filter in your report, if you're using filtered data, you know, perhaps the user has chosen it in another form or however, it's a good idea to display it on your report. That way, if they're looking at two different reports, they can see, you know, this report is from this date range, this other report I'm looking at is for another date range, you know, whatever the issue is, it's very helpful to display those filters on the report itself in the heading or something like that. It's also a good idea to pay attention to the colored error indicator. And here's where I'm going to go into Access and demo that, show you where that exists. So for example, we pull this report up in design mode. In the top left-hand corner here, you get a little warning box. And if you hover over that, Access is very helpful about telling you some general reporting errors or warnings. Things like the report's width is greater than the page width, so you might get extra blank pages that print. or, whatever. In this case, we have a report that by default was designed to be 21.5 inches, and even in landscape mode, if we've got this in landscape, we're talking 8 by 11. So, that might be your first indicator that you need to do something to your report to correct it before you even bother running it. Couple techniques for filtering data. There is two basic techniques for doing this. The first is to display an unbound form before the report, where you can put in your filters in that form, and then build your where clause that you use when you're calling your report from the results or the different fields in that form. So that's one technique to use. Let me show you an example of that here. So this particular form, and I'm just going to open it first in design view so you can see it. It has two fields, a category field and a job title field. And then when you run the report field here, the report button, then through the query, looks at the two fields, like the category field and the job title field. And if they are not null, or in other words, if they're filled in, it builds the where clause. And one helpful technique so that you don't have to do anything funny with this and in between a variable number of pieces of a where clause, is to preface or start out your where clause with this 1 equals 1. And that will allow you to build on and whatever the condition, however many conditions you want. 1 equals 1 will always evaluate to true. And so therefore you could have no categories or no job titles filled in, or you could have one or the other, or both of these filled in, and you would still get a viable where clause. And then you use that where clause down here in your open report statement. In this case, it's opening it in print preview and using that where condition to filter the report. So if I said something here like, I wanted to have a job title of president, and this is, you might have drop downs or whatever. I just put this up quickly for demonstration purposes, and then run the report. You would only get the companies or the contacts here that happen to have a title of president. You wouldn't get all of them. It would be your filtered results. Then the next way to do this is to use a parameter query for the record source of your report. So a parameter query is something like it's probably this one, if I remember correctly. We have this query, and in, oops, I don't have parameters in that. Let's be the other one here. Oh, yeah. So in the query setup, you use the parameters area to set up a parameter. And then if you use this query as your report source, then when you run the report, you'll get the pop-up like this, and they'll need to choose the title that they want. And in this case, again, if we put president in here, oops, this is, what did I do here? Whoops. Let's try that one more time. There we go. I must have did a typo or something like that. Anyway, so your query then, you know, is got the filter built right into the query itself, as opposed to needing to go through a form or something like that. Then the reports, I think this is the one, would just simply use as a data source that parameterized query. So if you ran that, then you would get the prompt for that, and you would, you know, put in your results, and then it would show you, you know, what you were looking for. So those are the two main ways of doing filtering for reports. There's probably others, but those are the ones that are most frequently used. Other reporting tips and techniques. There are two very powerful utilities in Access reports, and one of those is grouping, and the other one is subreports. To talk about grouping first, it's fairly simple, but in Access grouping, you can group a report to sort records by category of some kind and to display subtotals. So back to our list here. Got that. No, not in here, but I'll just show you here, and we can do it with this one. So down at the bottom here, you can see group, sort, and total. So if you wanted to add a group, you would just use this feature here to add a group. And the difference between a group and a sort is if you add a group, like you used job titles, say, as a group, then you have an actual header and a optional footer that you can use for that group. If you just add a sort, then that doesn't add those headers and footer options. It just allows you to sort in a particular way. If you add a group, then sort is automatically an option with your group. So you can see if you click the More button here, the default when you add a group is to add it with a header section. You can also change this to put in a footer section where you could do like subtotals. And you can set this setting, which is to keep groups together on one page. And that's helpful if you have groups that are tend to be smaller. You know, if your group is going to run through multiple pages, you don't want to check, you know, typically you don't want to check that option. But if it's something that's going to be, you know, typically a quarter of a page in length or something like that, then it's a good idea to select the option over here to keep the whole group together on one page. That way you can, you know, have a little bit more readable report. And another option that's kind of in between that, which I do suggest using all the time, is to keep the header and the first record together on one page, and that just makes it much more readable. You know, if you're not going to keep the whole group together, I suggest you at minimum keep the header and first record together on one page. If you're using headers, you can use only footers. You can turn off the header section and instead just use a footer. And then you can do your sorts here with this piece of the sorting. And the value bit is something that it depends upon the type of group you've selected. I believe in dates you can sort, if you use it like a date field, you can sort by using like the week or the month or that kind of thing. But you know, the default here is sort by the entire value, but if you wanted to sort by just you know, a custom number of characters or whatever, you could do so and add totals through that. So that's very powerful to use groups and sorts, and you can nest them. You can have you know, groups that nest inside of other groups. I think I have a report here already saved. This one. Yes, this one I already saved. I did the job title, and in this case, I have, you know, just the name of it, but you might do something like this particular thing is a record count at the bottom. You might show like a record count of each type, so you showed what you were getting here. I don't know what's going on here, but it says I no longer have control. Can you still see this? Maybe it just... You can't see it, Lucy? Let me try my screen again. How about that? Yeah, I tried sharing my screen again. I see now. Stop presenting, so I think I'm okay. I don't know what happened there. I must have hit something odd. Okay, so anyway, you can do like subtotals and that kind of thing. Good, Lucy can see this now, so we're set. You can do subtotals and that kind of thing inside your groups, and you know, using fields like a sum of values in your different rows or something like that, and that's usually best used in the footer. It can be used in the header, but it can be a little bit more problematic if you use it in the header. So I tend to, if I'm using subtotals, I tend to use those in the group footers as opposed to the headers. And then there's subreports. And what a subreport is actually having a report that's nested inside another report. So in this particular, the outer report is this contacts report, and then there's a control actually placed into the detail that is a type subreport. And if you're in design mode, you can't usually, unless your screen is really large, see subreport as an option, but if you click on the little more button there, then you can see the subform or subreport option. And you know, if you're in a form and you bring it in, it becomes a subform. If you're in a report and you bring that control in, it becomes a subreport. And then you actually set the subreport, the source object, to be an actual report. So this report conversations here is what the source for that is. And then you, just like you do when you have subforms, you can link controls from your master report to your child report. In this case, I'm going to link on the ID from the main contacts record, and then the contacts ID on the conversations. So the conversations are something that each contact has. And so then when we run this report, we're able to see that this particular contact had multiple conversations, and here are the details of the conversations, etc. And if there were other conversations for these other contacts, they would appear right under here. Now, a couple interesting things about the sub-reports to know. If you're working with sub-reports, you cannot put your labels for reports in a page header. That is because page headers do not work in sub-reports, and if you think about it, that makes sense. A page header is designed to be at the top of each physical printed page in the report, and the sub-report is a part of the main report, so it doesn't have its own pages at all. And so that's why you have to use like a group header for labels in your, or a report header, I believe, can work as well for the sub-report. Usually it's best for sub-reports to remove fields and minimize headers and footers in the sub-reports. That way you just get a much cleaner report. And it's often helpful to set the can shrink property for the sub-report detail and the control itself to yes. And I'm going to get to why to do that in just a second here. But if we look at this in design view, what I mean by that, this is a sub-report control itself. And if you go to the format, by default, can grow is usually set to yes, but can shrink is usually set to no. So it's helpful to set this both on the sub-report control, which is this one here, and inside the sub-report itself. If you're looking at the detail of that, it's helpful to set the property there as well. And again, the default is can grow yes and can shrink no, but setting the can shrink to yes is helpful. And the reason that's helpful is even though you can't see it on this particular report in this view, if you instead go to print preview mode, then if you've got those shrink properties set, then you don't even get this like conversations in the line for those that don't have data. So it just makes your report a little smaller, that is a default to hide those if there's nothing there and it shrinks down to nothing. Unfortunately, that doesn't work on what is the report open view, the Access. If you just open it, it's called report view. You can see that here in report view. So that doesn't do that, but if you do it in print preview, or if you actually print it, then it does do that minimizing for you. So it's helpful to set those properties. Other properties that can be helpful to set on the sub-report, things like auto resize to no. You probably want to set your scroll bars for your sub-report to neither, as opposed to the horizontal or the vertical scroll bars. Just makes for a cleaner report. And sometimes it's helpful to set the top and left padding in the sub-report control to 0. That just helps you line up things a little bit better if you're using a sub-report. Otherwise, you get columns if you're in design view and you have them relatively lined up, and you have some padding set on your sub-report, you get things skewed over a little bit to the right. You may also want to set the alternate row color for both the main report and the sub-report to no color. The reason is that the alternate row color operates separately in each report, and so you would end up, if you had a report like we were looking at here, where we have, you know, this control, and this is the first record, and the background is white, and then we have a sub-report where the first record is this one and the background's white, and then the next record is this one and the background's gray. This particular control would appear gray, and then we would move on to the second one of the master, and that would be gray, and then we would get white, and then we would get gray. And so it doesn't inherit from the master report nicely. So it just gets very confusing to use the alternate row color, in my opinion, with sub-reports. So I would advise to turn it off unless you're going to really mess with it and get it to look clean, or if you've got something else going on. Like I said earlier, if a sub-report has no data, it automatically will not print, and that's only in the print preview or the actual print mode, not in report view mode. If you have a label to your sub-report control, you can use the main form's detail on print event and set the visible property of that label to the value of your sub-report has data property. So what I mean by that is here we've got a report, and I don't have a label here for this report. But if you were going to use a label, and you were going to have that label, you know, where it would show something like, you know, up in here where it said conversations, as opposed to that in your header here. Like I have a header here, conversations, and that's just, I decided to use that. I think it was good enough. But if you wanted, because of the nature, to have some kind of label up here, then you might on the let's see, find the right event here. Okay, so you would use the main form's detail like this, and on the format event here, you could do something like, whoops, this macro here. You could do something like if and then you would use the sub-report and the value of the report. If has data, so if that, I think it's equals 0, then you would set the property of that label, whatever the label was, or actually you wouldn't even have to do that. You could just set the property to that. So let me get out of here. The control, and I don't have a control on here, I don't think. So that would be whatever the report label was. So I'm just going to choose a label because I don't have one on there. But you would set the label visible property to equal that sub-reports has data field. And so what that would do would be if you So essentially what this would do is when the detail of the main report is trying to get formatted, it sets that label, which would be the label associated with the subreport, equal to the visible property, equal to whether or not the subreport has data or not. So if the report had no data and the report naturally then will be not showing, then the label wouldn't show either. But if the report was showing because it had data, then the label would show. So that's one trick to use if you are using a subreport label. Let's save that here. All right. How are we doing on time here? Doing all right here. Because the report view is a little different, and we saw that with the example of the fact that it didn't use the has no data or has data field or property to control whether or not the subreport prints or not. I wanted to just briefly review what happens on this report view, which is the default. So the only report events that fire in the case of report view are, in the case we're opening in it, report open, report load, report activate, report got focus, and detail paint. And it does so in that order. And then likewise, if we're closing a report view, the only events that fire are in this order: detail paint, report unload, lost focus, deactivate, and then close. And that's just helpful to have, because if you are using other events in your report to do things, then you cannot expect them to work properly in report view. So you want to make sure, if you're doing so, that you change the default of how you're opening your reports and use something like print preview instead. So that is it for the general topics here. I did put my contact information. I am on Twitter. You can email me directly or through the Access User Group lunchtime site, and I do get those emails. I do invite you, if you're interested in topics like this, to go onto my website and register. I've got a newsletter that I send each month via email, and you can get other tips through that. And of course, to join our Access Lunchtime group in the future, we have at the last Tuesday of each month a informative presentation about Microsoft Access on different topics, and also other Access user groups, which you can get to from the Access Lunchtime groups main page. You can go back and look at the other Access user groups. We have several of them. They all offer, presentations online. They're about, in general, different topics or parts of Access, and are at different days and times of the week. And we do video all of these, so you can get to that. So I am going to open this up to questions. I see that we do have at least one question here. Let's see, let me stop this particular slideshow so I can grab this back, maybe. Okay, so we have Phil that is saying, what strategy do you use on a filter form for a no data result for reports? I've seen this result in error messages. So if you use, if you have on a filter form, and you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this isn't what you're talking about. So you're talking about a form.
This would be where you're building, like using a filter form to build the SQL to run a report.
So like this one that we looked at here.
Kind of like that, exactly. You know, and then when you click the command button, you know, obviously it builds the SQL, it opens the report,
Right.
and even on the even though on the report itself there's the you know, the no data event is cancel if there's no data, or is put up a message. But then I've seen where, you know, if you click on the command button, if there's no data, even though you've informed the user that there's no data for the report, the form actually generates an error message, you know, saying that there's no data for the report. So you're actually ending up with a duplicate error message.
Okay. Okay. So, and you're saying that that comes from the command itself.
Yeah, like, you know, when you click the command button to run the report,
Right.
you know, you build the SQL, you know, do command open report, you know, you set the data source to the SQL.
Right.
That was built up from the filter form, but in the event that there isn't any data for that particular filter, then what'll happen is, you know, on the report itself, you know, typically I'll always code where if there's no data, I'll at least give the user a message box, you know, that says, hey, there's no data for this report, you know, the report request has been canceled. But
Right.
then when the focus comes back to the form, then Access generates its own error message because there was no data in the report when you ran that event.
Okay. All right. So what you're saying, I think, is if you go in here and you use something like if okay, so this is in the event here itself, the no data event. So if we use something here like do the message box and say no data found, and then we do a cancel event like that, you're saying that if we run this here, that we're going to get
I'll put in a non-existent job title.
I'm just going to put something like this in here, so we should get no data. So we get this, which is what you're expecting, but you're saying then you usually get an error message.
Then there can be a separate message on there that comes up.
Yeah, and I'm not.
And this is where you're building, if you will, like a complex filter criteria.
Right.
So I was wondering if you'd ever run into that type of a situation where.
I think as long as you do the cancel, I think that's the key. So as long as you've got, I must have pulled up the wrong report. I think it's this one here. But as long as in your no data macro, you are sure to also use the cancel event, then I believe that the report does not open up at all, and so you don't get that message.
Okay.
So I would check for that to see if you're missing this.
Yeah, I'd probably have to send you a specific example, but
okay.
I have seen it come up on occasion, you know, where, you know, if I'm doing, you know, multi-field criterias on a filter form, where, you know, and I can't even remember what the error number is that pops up. It's been a while, but.
Okay, yeah, I'd be interested in that. And we can start, there is a blog on the Access Lunchtime site. Are you a member in that site?
Yep.
So if you come across a specific example, if you want to email that to me, then I can, if you're not able to post on there yourself, I can, you know, post that on that blog, and we can, you know, use that as a follow-up sample.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try and dig up a sample of what I'm talking about.
That's good. All right, I appreciate it, and I will put these this presentation into PDF format, and I will post that on the blog as well, so you can have that as a reference. To get the access pieces of it, you have to go to the actual video
Right.
link, which will take
Right.
a couple days usually to post.
No problem. I've looked at previous meeting videos, so no problem. I'm familiar with the routine.
Any
Okay.
other questions?
No, that's it. Thanks. Just thought I'd check with you what strategy you might use just to avoid that happening when it does happen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and
Okay. You have
thanks
a
for
pleasant
joining us
afternoon.
today.